A dust-covered box was found deep inside Neverland Ranch, locked away in a safe that required 4 different keys. Inside, a photograph that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about Michael Jackson. In the photo, Michael stood beside a child who didn't exist. At least, not in any public record. On the back, a date and a note written in Michael's own hand, 1985, never forget. But in 1985, Michael Jackson had no children. So who was this child? And why had nobody ever spoken about them? They say some photographs capture more than a moment, they capture a soul. This is the story of the soul Michael Jackson protected for 24 years. It was July 2009, just weeks after Michael Jackson's sudden death. Estate executors were cataloging the contents of Neverland Ranch when they discovered Michael's private quarters, sealed and untouched. In a safe hidden behind a portrait, they found something that shouldn't exist. A small wooden box, hand-carved, ancient-looking, with initials engraved on the lid, MJ and DM. Inside the box were 3 items that would unlock Michael's most closely guarded secret: a child's hospital bracelet, a faded Polaroid photograph, and a sealed letter with instructions in Michael's handwriting, to be opened only in the event of my death. The photograph showed Michael Jackson looking impossibly young, probably in his mid-20s, standing in what appeared to be a hospital room. Beside him, holding his hand with complete trust, was a small child with dark curly hair, large brown eyes that mirrored Michael's own, and a smile that seemed to light up the frame. The child wore a hospital gown and clutched a stuffed rabbit. On the back of the photograph, in Michael's distinctive handwriting, Danny, August 15, 1985, never forget, you saved me. The hospital bracelet read, Daniel Marcus, age 5, St. Mary's Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. The sealed letter was addressed to whoever finds this. The estate executors opened it, bound by legal obligations and Michael's explicit final wishes. What they read would remain confidential for years, protected by privilege and secrecy. But slowly, like water finding cracks in concrete, pieces of the story began to emerge through careful investigation, interviews with people who had been close to Michael during that period, and eventually, testimony from those who had witnessed the impossible bond. This is that story. The story of how a dying 5-year-old child saved Michael Jackson's life. August 1985. Michael Jackson was at the absolute peak of his fame. Thriller had become the best-selling album of all time. The Victory Tour with his brothers had just concluded in triumph. Michael was 27 years old, famous beyond imagination, wealthy beyond measure, and profoundly, devastatingly alone. The pressure of fame, the constant scrutiny, the betrayals by people he had trusted, the realization that he could never have a normal life, all of it was crushing him from the inside out. Michael was in the darkest depression of his life, standing at the edge of a cliff, contemplating whether being alive was worth the unbearable pain of being Michael Jackson. And then everything changed. On August 12, 1985, Michael was admitted to St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Los Angeles under an assumed name. Officially for exhaustion and dehydration. But really? His doctor and closest friends were terrified he might hurt himself. Michael was placed in a private wing, far from other patients, surrounded by security, isolated even in his moment of deepest crisis. For 3 days, Michael barely spoke. He refused food. He stared at walls like they held answers. His doctor was considering more intensive psychiatric intervention, medication, perhaps even hospitalization in a facility designed for people who had given up on life. But Michael didn't know that yet. In that same hospital, in the long-term care unit, lived a child named Daniel Marcus. 5 years old. Born with a severe congenital heart defect that should have killed him before his first birthday. 7 major surgeries before age 5. Parents who abandoned him at the hospital when he was 2 years old, unable to cope with the financial and emotional devastation of watching their son die slowly. Daniel had become a ward of the state, living permanently in the hospital, waiting for a heart transplant that the doctors said would probably never come in time. They gave him 6 months. Maybe less. Despite everything, despite the pain, despite the abandonment, despite knowing he was dying, Daniel Marcus was the happiest child in that hospital. He would visit other sick children, trying to make them smile. He would draw pictures for the nurses who worked double shifts. He would sing songs he learned from the television in the common room, his small voice carrying hope through corridors designed for grief. His favorite singer? Michael Jackson. Daniel had a small poster of Michael from the Thriller album taped to the wall beside his hospital bed, and he would sing Billie Jean constantly, dancing as much as his damaged heart would allow, moonwalking in slow motion down hallways, bringing light into darkness. On August 15, 1985, Daniel Marcus made a decision that would change 2 lives forever. He escaped from his hospital room. He was supposed to be resting before another surgery scheduled for the next morning, but Danny had overheard 2 nurses talking in hushed voices about the special patient in the private wing, and his 5-year-old brain had assembled enough clues to convince himself of an impossible truth: Michael Jackson was in the hospital. His hero was here. Right here. Close enough to find. Daniel, wearing his hospital gown, dragging his 4-pole behind him like a loyal companion, made his way through corridors he wasn't supposed to access, past security guards who weren't watching carefully enough, following instinct and hope until he found the private wing. And there, through a partially open door, Danny saw something that made his heart, his broken, failing heart, skip a beat. Michael Jackson. Sitting on a hospital bed. Alone. Staring at nothing with eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to see. Are you Michael Jackson? The small voice cut through the fog of Michael's depression like a knife through silk. Michael looked up, startled, disoriented. For a moment, he was going to call for security. But something about this tiny boy, clearly very sick, dragging medical equipment, looking at him with such pure, uncomplicated joy, stopped his hand before it reached the call button. Something in those eyes reminded Michael of something he'd forgotten. Hope, maybe. Or innocence. Or the simple miracle of being excited about being alive. Yes, Michael said quietly, his voice rough from days of not using it. I'm Michael Jackson. I knew it. Daniel's face exploded with the biggest smile Michael had ever seen, a smile that seemed impossible on a child this sick. I knew you were here. Can I come in? Please? I won't tell anybody. I promise. Cross my heart. He made the gesture, his small hand crossing over the chest that held his failing heart. Michael, despite everything he was feeling, despite wanting to be left alone, despite the darkness consuming him from within, found himself nodding. Okay. Come in. Daniel entered the room like he was entering a sacred space, parking his 4-pole beside Michael's bed with the practiced ease of someone who'd been tethered to medical equipment for most of his conscious life. He climbed up onto the bed and sat cross-legged next to Michael, looking at him with eyes that held more wisdom than any 5-year-old should possess. Why are you sad? Daniel asked with the devastating directness that only children can manage, the kind of question that bypasses all adult defenses. I can see you're sad. Your eyes look like my eyes look when I'm sad. Michael was stunned by the question, by its simplicity and its accuracy. How do you know I'm sad? Because you look how I look when I think about my mommy and daddy, Daniel said with matter-of-fact honesty. They went away and they're not coming back. The nurses say they couldn't handle it anymore. Handle me, I mean. Because I'm sick too much and I cost too much money and it was too hard for them. His voice held no anger, just acceptance of a truth too painful for most adults to bear. Michael's heart, the one he thought had stopped feeling anything, broke into 1,000 pieces. Here was this child, dying, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love him most, and he was worried about Michael being sad. I'm sorry, Michael said, his voice cracking. That's not fair. That's not right. You deserve so much better than that. Daniel shrugged with a wisdom that belonged to someone who'd lived 80 years, not 5. It's okay. I'm still here. I'm still alive. That's what matters, right? Being alive? He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. That simple question hit Michael like a physical blow, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Being alive. Was that what mattered? Michael had been so consumed by his pain, so focused on what being alive had cost him, that he had forgotten the simple, profound miracle of being alive at all. "You're right," Michael said softly, feeling something shift inside him. "That is what matters." Daniel's smile grew even wider. "Do you want to hear me sing? I can sing your songs." "I know all of them." "Well, most of them. Some of the words are hard, but I try my best." Before Michael could answer, before he could prepare himself, Daniel launched into an off-key, enthusiastic, completely uninhibited rendition of Billie Jean, complete with attempted dance moves that were severely limited by the four-line but absolutely full of joy and life and pure, unfiltered happiness. His small voice filled the room, slightly flat on some notes, missing some words, but singing with more heart than Michael had heard in years of professional performances. Michael laughed. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Michael Jackson laughed. Not a publicity laugh. Not a performance laugh. Not the kind of laugh you give to be polite. A real laugh. A genuine expression of joy at this absurd, beautiful, dying child singing his song in a hospital room, dancing despite being tethered to machines, choosing joy despite every reason to choose despair. "That was amazing," Michael said when Daniel finished with a dramatic bow that nearly tangled his four-line. "You have real talent. Serious talent." "Really?" Daniel's eyes went as wide as moons. "You really, really think so? The nurses say I sing too loud. They say I should save my energy for getting better." "Never stop singing," Michael said suddenly, fiercely, grabbing the small boy's shoulders gently. "Never let anyone tell you to stop singing. Singing is what keeps us alive. Music is what makes life worth living. Promise me you'll never stop." Daniel nodded with complete seriousness, accepting this wisdom from his hero like it was a sacred vow. Then he asked the question that would change everything. "Why are you in the hospital, Michael? Are you sick like me? Is your heart broken too?" Michael hesitated. How do you explain depression to a 5-year-old? How do you explain that sometimes being alive hurts so much that you want to stop? How do you tell a dying child that you, with everything in the world, were thinking about giving it all away? I'm sick in a different way," Michael finally said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm sick in my heart. Not like your heart is sick. But I'm sick from being sad all the time. From feeling alone even when there are people everywhere around me." Daniel thought about this for a long moment, his small face serious. Then he reached out and took Michael's hand. His fingers were so small they barely wrapped around one of Michael's fingers. "I get lonely too," Daniel said quietly. "Even though there are doctors and nurses here all the time, taking care of me, checking on me. I still feel alone. Because they're not my family. They're just people who help me because it's their job, not because they love me." "Exactly," Michael said, his throat tight. "Exactly like that. But you know what helps me?" Daniel asked, his voice brightening. "When I'm lonely, I think about all the people in the world who are listening to your music right now. And I know that right this second, somewhere, someone is listening to Billie Jean or Thriller and they're happy. They're dancing. They're smiling. And that makes me happy too. Because your music makes people happy. You make people happy. Even when you're sad, you make other people happy. That's like magic." Michael felt tears streaming down his face, hot and unexpected. This dying child, abandoned by his parents, confined to a hospital, living on borrowed time, was trying to comfort him. Was telling him that his life had meaning. That his music mattered. That he made a difference. "Thank you," Michael whispered, his voice breaking completely. "Thank you, Danny." That was the moment he decided to live. Days blurred into laughter, stories, songs, and promises that felt like prayers. For the first time in years, Michael forgot who he was, forgot about being the king of pop, forgot about the pressure and the fame and the constant performance, and remembered how it felt to simply be human. To be a friend. To care about someone without cameras watching. He didn't need stages. He didn't need applause. He just needed the sound of a child's laughter echoing in a hospital room. Michael pulled strings, made calls, used his influence in ways he rarely did for personal reasons. By evening, Daniel Marcus had been officially moved into the room directly next to Michael's, with a connecting door that stayed open 24 hours a day. For the next 5 days, while Michael was supposed to be dealing with his depression and Danny was supposed to be preparing for his life-saving surgery, they were inseparable. Two souls who had found each other in the darkest place, creating light together. Michael told Danny stories about touring the world, about performing for millions, about the craziness and the magic of fame. Danny told Michael about life in the hospital, about the other sick kids who were his friends, about the dreams he had of someday going to Disneyland, seeing the ocean, eating ice cream that wasn't hospital ice cream, running without getting tired, living a normal life even though he knew that was probably impossible. "I've never been anywhere," Danny said one afternoon, his voice matter-of-fact but tinged with sadness. "Just the hospital. I was born here and I'll probably die here too. But that's okay. At least I met you. That's more than most kids ever get to do. Meeting their hero, I mean." Michael made a decision in that moment, one that felt like the first real decision he'd made in months. "Danny," he said with complete seriousness, kneeling down to be eye level with the boy. "I want you to make me a promise." "Okay," Danny said, his eyes wide. "What kind of promise?" "Promise me you'll fight. Promise me you'll survive your surgery tomorrow. Promise me you won't give up, no matter how hard it gets." "Why?" Danny asked simply. "Because," Michael said, his voice steady and certain, "when you get out of this hospital, not if, when, I'm going to take you to Disneyland. And to my house. And you're going to meet my family. My brothers, my sisters, my mother. And you're going to have all the experiences you deserve to have. All the normal kid things you've missed. But you have to survive first. You have to fight. Deal?" Danny's eyes filled with tears that spilled down his cheeks. "Deal," he whispered, holding out his tiny pinky finger. "Pinky promise. Those are the most important kind." Michael linked his pinky with Danny's. Pinky promise. The most important kind. Michael didn't know it then, but this would be the last promise he ever made to Danny. On August 20th, 1985, Daniel Marcus was wheeled into surgery at 6 a.m. for a 12-hour operation to repair the catastrophic defects in his failing heart. Michael Jackson sat in the surgical waiting room for every single minute of those 12 hours, refusing to leave, refusing to eat, refusing to do anything except pray to a God he wasn't entirely sure he believed in anymore. He made bargains. He made promises. He begged. "Please," Michael whispered into his clasped hands. "Please let him live. Take anything from me, but let him live." When the surgeon finally emerged at 6:47 p.m., his surgical mask pulled down, exhaustion etched in every line of his face, and said, "He made it. The surgery was successful. We repaired everything we could. He has a chance now. A real chance." Michael collapsed into a chair and sobbed with relief so profound it felt like his soul was being rebuilt from the inside out. The photograph in the wooden box, the one that would be found 24 years later, was taken the next day when Michael was finally allowed to see Danny for the first time after surgery. Danny was weak, pale, covered in tubes and monitors, clearly in pain. But alive. And when he saw Michael, he smiled. That same impossible smile. Always choosing joy. Always finding light. "I kept my promise," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now you have to keep yours. Disneyland, remember?" "I will," Michael promised, taking the small hand carefully, mindful of all the 4 lines. "I absolutely will. I promise you, Danny. We're going to have the best time. You're going to have the best life. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. Nobody saw coming. Nobody was prepared for. 2 days after Danny's successful surgery, while Michael was back at Neverland making concrete plans to become Danny's legal guardian, arranging for the best post-surgical care, designing a room for Danny in his house, Michael received a phone call from St. Mary's Hospital. The kind of phone call that stops time. Daniel Marcus had developed a post-surgical infection. Despite aggressive antibiotic treatment, despite every intervention available to modern medicine, despite the very best doctors doing everything they possibly could, the infection had spread to his bloodstream. It was moving too fast. His weakened body couldn't fight it. Danny was dying. Michael drove to the hospital at dangerous speeds, his hands shaking on the wheel, his mind refusing to accept what he'd been told. He arrived to find Danny in intensive care, barely conscious, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and tried desperately to keep his small body alive just a little longer. Michael was gowned and masked and allowed in to say goodbye to the child who had saved his life just 10 days earlier. Behind the mask, Michael's tears fogged the plastic shield. He could barely see Danny's face through the blur, but he could hear the faintest whisper of the boy's voice. "Hey, champ," Michael said, trying desperately to keep his voice steady and failing completely. "Hey there, superstar." "Hey, Michael," Danny whispered, each word clearly costing him effort. "I'm sorry. I tried to keep my promise. I really tried." "You did keep it," Michael said, his voice breaking into pieces. "You fought so hard. You're still fighting. You're the bravest person I've ever met." "Michael," Danny said, struggling to keep his eyes open, struggling to speak. "Can you do something for me? One last thing?" "Anything," Michael said immediately. "Anything in the world. Can you sing to me? One of your songs? So I can take it with me?" So Michael Jackson, tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking in ways he didn't know hearts could break, sang "Never Can Say Goodbye" a cappella, his voice cracking on every other word, breaking on every note, barely able to get through the lyrics. And every note broke a little more of him. But he sang. Because Danny asked him to. Because it was the last thing he could give. Daniel Marcus closed his eyes for the last time at 3:47 a.m. on August 23, 1985, while Michael Jackson held his hand and sang to him about never saying goodbye. He was 5 years old. He had lived in a hospital for most of those 5 years. He had been abandoned by his parents. He had suffered more pain than most people experience in 80 years. But in his final days, he had met his hero. He had sung together with Michael Jackson. He had made a friend who loved him. And he had saved a life by giving his own meaning. Michael Jackson paid for Daniel's funeral with instructions that it be private and dignified. He attended the service in disguise, wearing sunglasses and a simple suit, sitting in the very back of an almost empty church, mourning a child that the world would never know about. Only a handful of hospital staff came to honor Danny. No family. No parents. No relatives. Just Michael, a few nurses who had cared for this abandoned boy, and a priest who had never met him but who spoke beautifully about the souls that shine brightest in the darkest places. After Danny's death, Michael fell into a depression even darker than before. But this time it was different. This time, his grief was mixed with purpose. Danny had told him that his music made people happy. That his life had meaning. That he mattered. Danny had believed in him when Michael didn't believe in himself. And Danny had fought to stay alive, even when alive meant nothing but pain and tubes and surgeries, because life, just being alive, was precious. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Michael made a private vow that day, standing in that nearly empty church, looking at a casket that was far too small. He would never forget Daniel Marcus. He would live the life that Danny never got to live. He would create joy for children who, like Danny, deserved joy but rarely got it. He would build places where kids could be kids, where sick children could forget about hospitals, where abandoned children could feel loved. And someday, when he had children of his own, he would tell them about the little boy who saved Michael Jackson's life by showing him what courage really looked like. The wooden box found in 2009, the photograph, the hospital bracelet, and the sealed letter were Michael's way of keeping Danny's memory sacred and protected. Michael never spoke publicly about Danny. Not once. He never used the story for sympathy or publicity. He never exploited Danny's memory for emotional manipulation of his fans. It was too personal. Too precious. Too painful. Too sacred. This was Michael's private grief, his private salvation, his private promise to a child who deserved to be remembered but who Michael wanted to protect even in death. But those who were closest to Michael during the last decades of his life noticed something curious. Every August 23rd, without fail, Michael would disappear for an entire day. He would cancel rehearsals, postpone meetings, refuse all calls. Nobody was allowed to contact him. And nobody knew where he went. Until after his death, when investigators pieced together credit card records and private driver logs. Michael went to a small, quiet cemetery in Los Angeles and spent hours, sometimes the entire day, sitting by a simple gravestone that read, Daniel Marcus, 1980 to 1985, an angel too special for Earth. Michael would bring toys, new toys, expensive toys, the kinds of toys Danny had never gotten to play with. Children's books about adventures Danny never got to have. Stuffed animals to keep the rabbit company. And Michael would talk to Danny, telling him everything about his life, about his children, about the music he was making, about the struggles he was facing. I'm still here, Danny, Michael would say every year. I'm still singing. Like you told me to. I'm still fighting. Because of you. After Michael's death in 2009, when the photograph and the letter were discovered in that locked box, investigators began tracking down the truth. They found Daniel Marcus's records at St. Mary's. They confirmed every detail of the story. They found hospital staff who remembered the impossible bond between the suicidal superstar and the dying child. They found the gravestone that Michael had paid for and maintained for 24 years. They found receipts for toys purchased every August 23rd for over 2 decades. They found the truth that Michael had protected all those years. In 2019, after years of research and verification, journalist Sarah Mitchell finally published the full story in an extensively documented article titled The Boy Who Saved Michael Jackson, The Secret Story of Daniel Marcus. The world learned for the first time about the 5-year-old abandoned child who had given Michael Jackson a reason to live during the darkest moment of his life. The article went viral, reaching hundreds of millions of people across every continent. Suddenly, everything about Michael made sense in a new context. People understood Michael's fierce, almost fanatical protection of children. His creation of Neverland as a place where children could experience pure joy without pain. His advocacy for sick children, abandoned children, suffering children. His rage against anyone who hurt children. His willingness to sacrifice his own reputation, his own career, his own peace to defend children who needed defending. It all made sense now. It all traced back to August 1985 and a 5-year-old boy named Daniel Marcus who had taught Michael Jackson that some promises are worth keeping forever. Michael never got over losing Danny, said one of Michael's closest friends in an interview for the article. He never talked about it publicly. Most of us who knew him well didn't even know the full story. But we understood that something had happened in 1985 that changed him fundamentally. Before Danny, Michael was self-destructive, barely holding on. After Danny, Michael had purpose. He had a reason to live. Danny gave Michael the gift of meaning, and Michael spent the rest of his life trying to honor that gift by helping other children like Danny. Children who deserved love and got abandonment. Children who deserved life and got hospital rooms. Children who deserved joy and got pain. Michael was trying to save Danny over and over again by saving every child he could reach. Today, in Michael Jackson's memory and in Daniel Marcus's honor, there is a foundation called Never Forget, the Michael and Danny Foundation that provides comprehensive financial and emotional support to families struggling with children who have serious medical conditions. The foundation pays for surgeries, medications, hospital stays, and post-treatment care. It provides counseling for parents who feel overwhelmed. It creates support networks so no family feels alone. It ensures that no child is abandoned because the medical bills became too crushing. Since its creation, the foundation has helped over 100,000 families. 100,000 children who got to keep fighting because Michael kept his promise to Danny. The photograph from the wooden box, the one showing Michael and Danny holding hands in that hospital room, hangs in the foundation's headquarters in Los Angeles. Visitors see it every day. A reminder of the profound bond between a dying child and a suicidal superstar, both of whom saved each other when they needed it most. Both of whom gave each other reasons to keep fighting. Both of whom proved that sometimes the people who save us are the people who need saving themselves. The story of Michael Jackson and Daniel Marcus reminds us that sometimes the people who save our lives are the most unexpected people. That sometimes a 5-year-old child has more wisdom than the most famous person in the world. That sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones nobody else knows about, the private connections that change us in ways the public never sees. That sometimes the promises we make in hospital rooms matter more than the promises we make on stages. Michael Jackson went on to live another 24 years after Daniel Marcus died. He created more music that touched billions. He performed on more stages in front of more people. He broke more records. He had children of his own whom he loved with a fierce protectiveness that now makes complete sense. But according to everyone who knew him best, Michael never forgot the promise he made to Danny in that hospital room, to keep singing, to keep fighting, to keep living, because life is precious and meaningful, even when it's unbearably hard. Especially when it's hard. Michael kept his promise. Now it's your turn. Keep singing. Keep fighting. Keep living. Because somewhere, someone might be listening to you the way Danny listened to Michael. Someone might need your voice the way Michael needed Danny's wisdom. You might save someone's life without even knowing it, just by choosing to stay alive, to keep trying, to keep believing that being here matters. If this story of hidden grief and secret salvation moved you deeply, subscribe to hear more untold stories about the private humanity behind public figures. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their life has meaning, even in their darkest moments. Comment below about someone who saved your life without ever knowing they did. Because sometimes, just like Michael and Danny in that hospital room in August 1985, we save each other in ways we never fully understand. And sometimes, the most important promise we can keep is simply to stay alive, to keep singing, to never forget that being here, being alive, being human, matters more than we can possibly know. Every life has meaning. Every promise matters. Every connection changes us. This is Daniel Marcus's story, the forgotten child who saved Michael Jackson and changed the world without anyone knowing until it was almost too late to tell.